Hello, my name is Candice Ture. I'm a licensed social worker. I'm a certified mental health coach. I'm a poet among poets, and I'm a healer who is healing. And I work with academically thriving Black teens and young adults to help them to build confidence, reduce stress, and cultivate a positive racial identity, even if on the outside they appear to have it all figured out, and especially if they attend predominantly white schools and institutions. So much of that work is birthed from my own experience as an academically thriving Black teen and young adult who went through predominantly white schools and institutions. Today, I'm talking a little bit about grief, and then I'm going to share a blues poem that I wrote. And so, this poem was inspired actually by an August Wilson play called Joe Turner's Come and Gone that I saw for Black History Month at the Indianapolis Repertoire Theater. And it was directed by Timothy Douglas, and this play takes place in the year of 1910, 1911. And anyone who knows August Wilson plays, there's so much depth, there's so much layers. And so one of the themes that I noticed was grief and loss, really of the Black experience, but particularly I had zoomed in on a character named Mattie Campbell. So the poem is called Mattie Campbell's Blues. And so one thing that I do regularly is I try to put myself into affirming Black spaces, definitely for Black History Month, but throughout the year. And so part of developing a positive racial identity is to be around positive examples with your people, but also just to be culturally affirmed and to be reminded of the beauty and the brilliance and the resiliency and the growth, and the ways in which we have overcome and are still overcoming. And so, there's amazing work done by the University of Pittsburgh Office of Child Development. I used to live in Pittsburgh, and it's called the Positive Racial Identity Development in Early Childhood. And there's brilliant research that talks about how it's so important for young kids to start developing a positive racial identity at the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, whether that's books or going to events, because racism they're impacted at a very young age, and they're just starting to notice changes in the differences, and the reality is, I personally think that we all, for the rest of our lives, we have to continue to develop a positive racial identity, specifically living in the context of the United States. And so even though I'm not a 3 or 4 year old anymore, we all have a 3 or 4 year old inside of us. And so those younger parts still need their racial identity affirmed and cultivated throughout life, especially if you're in predominantly white schools and institutions. The other thing I want to talk about really quickly is grief. And so in the mental health space, wellness space, we understand grief as a deeply human experience, that it is a natural response to any form of loss or change. And grief is not reserved just for the death of a loved one. That's very important. But grief shows up through identity change, right? Identity loss. Maybe you used to identify a certain way and now you don't, or maybe you used to have a certain way of doing things and you're not. So, for example, a really practical example for me is I at one point identified as a wife. I'm no longer married, so I went through like an identity grief of what does that mean for me. I work with teens and young adults who their identity sometimes is changing around their sexuality or around their gender, and their parents have grief around that, and there's maybe grief for them too, but it is a natural response to any form of change or loss. Grief can happen when your parents get a divorce. Grief can happen when friendships change. Maybe you're really close with friends, and then for whatever reason, there's some distance there. Grief can happen when you move schools, right? I've worked with so many teens where maybe in middle school, they've had a friend group, and then you go to high school, you go to college, and it changes, and there's grief, there's loss. And what's really most important is just to acknowledge that, oh, this is grief, this is loss. Because what happens in educational systems is we're so conditioned to push through. In high school, I remember I had a friend who died in a car accident. And then my senior year in college, I had a friend who died from complications of lupus. One of my best friends, actually, we were actually roommates. And I was like, well, I got to go to grad school. And I remember like pushing through, not really having the tools to honor like how big that loss was. And so what happens with grief is that grief is always grasping for air. And so if it can't get the air it needs in that time of your life, it'll raise up later. So when I became older, I became more like further along in my adult journey, and I started slowing down during the pandemic. So much grief that I hadn't really honored and been with came back to the surface. And so That's human. That's normal. Sometimes when we're in the thick of a big loss, we can't feel it. We can't feel it until we feel it. And as we know, all of us who have survived COVID, like that had its own grief, whether we lost loved ones or we lost social connection. Sometimes we go through, we go through breakups. So when I'm coaching people, I'm always aware that grief is always in the background of our lives, even if that's not the first thing we're talking about. Grief is always in the background of our lives, and just acknowledging it is really important. That, ooh, this is grief, or ooh, this is a loss, or ooh, this is a big change that I was not anticipating or not thinking was going to happen, but it did. So with that said, this is Hattie Campbell's blues. And this is, I took a blues poetry workshop, and so my attempt of trying a blues poem. And the cool thing is that art inspires art. And so I was sitting in this play and I was taking it in. I was like, I don't know how to process all these things. And so I wrote a poem. And so this is Hattie Campbell's Blues. My lover ran off and ain't coming back. My lover done run off and ain't coming back. Ain't never had no man stay. Even when I pray, I say, God, make his feet say my name on the road. I let a new man keep me company until my lover come back. Every time I let a new man keep me company, it's until my lover come back. I let a snake slide inside me and shed layers of who he is just so I ain't gotta feel what actually is. I buried both my children way back. Yes, I buried both my children way back. A mother's pain don't know which way to go, but still my heart sings even when it's low. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the carry me home. So that's Hattie Campbell's Blues. That was a really fun poem to write. The line that says, God, make his feet say my name on the road, that's actually a line that the character said in the play, and it like hit me deeply, and I remember writing it down while I was watching the play. So I wanted to put that in the poem. But we all experience grief, right? The Black grief experience is unique in a lot of ways because sometimes it feels like it's never ending, right? It's a loss of safety a lot of times, of not knowing where is my body safe in the world. Sometimes it's a loss of culture. If you have gone through predominantly white schools and institutions, at some point you do assimilate so that you can get through. And sometimes it can be hard to feel like you're code switching a lot. That sometimes it's just a loss of energy, right? Where it's like, man, I don't even have the energy to do other things because I'm navigating this system or I'm navigating this classroom. And so honoring your grief and whatever it looks like is really important. And if you would like to continue to stay connected, you can reach me at hellocandace.com.